Friends, as we dive into our message for this morning, I would invite you to turn to Luke. If you would like to follow along with our scripture, we'll begin with this reading from chapter 17, beginning in verse 11. This is the story of Jesus when he is approached by 10 men with a skin illness that was generally in a category called leprosy, and what happens in response to that. On the way to Jerusalem, Jesus was going through the region between Samaria and Galilee. As he entered a village, 10 lepers approached him. Keeping their distance, they called out, saying, "Jesus, Master, have mercy on us." When Jesus saw them, he said to them, "Go show yourselves to the priests." And as they went, they were made clean. Then one of them, when he saw that he was healed, turned back, praising God with a loud voice. He prostrated himself at Jesus' feet, and he thanked him. And he was a Samaritan. Then Jesus asked, "Were not 10 made clean? But the other 9, where are they? Was none of them found to return and to give praise to God except this foreigner?" Then Jesus said to the man, "Get up and go on your way. Your faith has made you well." May God add blessing to our reading and understanding of these words. This week we kick off our annual stewardship campaign, Growing with Grace, Giving Together. This is the time in which we talk about how it is that we steward our resources, our time, our energy, our prayer, how it is that we live up to the covenant that we make in membership to support one another as we journey through life. It's also the time when we look ahead to our future to plan together and talk about what it means to invest in the year to come. This year we begin with a foundation about how what we build on for anything we do as a people of faith. We begin with gratitude. And at first, a quick reading through this text tells us that it has something to do with gratitude, how some of us are grateful and other people are not. Or I think more to the point, how sometimes we are grateful. We express our gratitude. We share in thanksgiving. But how many times we do not. Remember, we're that mix of hot and cold. Each one of us, we have that within ourselves. So we know a little gratitude can go a long way. We've been told that since we were children. We've experienced that one time or another. Science has proved that there's a substantial physiological effect to gratitude. We've experienced its power in our everyday lives. I remember some years ago, my mom told me that I had to write thank you notes to people who had given me gifts at a birthday party. I was probably in elementary school, and I could not believe the audacity that she would make me do that, to write it to family who were obviously obligated to give me gifts, and to other kids who had come to the party that I had invited them to. I just thought it was so much work. But I did it because God bless my mother. She was trying to raise a good son. I remember many years later, though, in high school, I was in a program with a former governor of Kansas, and it was sort of a leadership training program, and he would teach us various things and introduce us to various people, and it kind of went throughout my high school years. I remember one time we had a session in which we were talking about gratitude, and one of the things that he began to talk about was the power of a handwritten note. Now, even those years ago when I was in high school, those were sort of going by the wayside. We were much more inclined to do emails or text messages or things of that nature. And he said, it's just not the same. So part of what we were required to do was to write 10 thank you notes to people who had had an impact in our life. One of the things that was surprising to me is that years later, I would have more than one of those people among the 10 who said, that note was still on their fridge or still in their office, that people held on to it. It's such a rarity these days to express our gratitude in heartfelt ways. And yet for folks who had had an impact in my life, those words made an impact in their life such that they would hold on to them for years to come. That is the power of gratitude. And when we talk this morning, that's the power that we're talking about. There is a strength that comes for us and for others when we share in our gratitude. So perhaps, I know it's not yet November, but perhaps it's a good time to ask what it is that you're thankful for. What do you have to be grateful for in your life right now? Those 10 lepers, they have a lot to be grateful for, don't they? From our scripture today, these 10 men whose lives have really been turned upside down by this disease that they caught that was probably no fault of their own. They have much to be grateful for, and yet only one comes back to say thanks. I don't know about you, but when I read this text this week, I thought, that feels representative. It feels representative of the experience I get, that it seems like maybe 1 in 10 times where I've done something gracious for another person and they ought to express their gratitude to me. Maybe 10% of the time they do. But I can't control other people. It also felt like, if I was being honest and took an assessment of the number of people that I thanked, the number of times I thanked God for the blessings in my life, the quotient of gratitude that I have in my life, it was maybe operating in that 10 to 20% range. It feels representative to me. Let's dive into the story. It begins by saying that Jesus is walking in this borderland. It says he's walking in between these two places. He's walking between Samaria, which is sort of a hostile, unfriendly environment, a place where the other lives, and Judea, the place of comfort. And I'm going to be honest, that really spoke to me this week, because I feel like we're walking a borderland. We're walking an in-between place. That we're somewhere between what we know and what we don't know. I'm talking about that specifically as a community, as we talk about Pastor Nanette transitioning into retirement and questioning for ourselves, us as Common Grace, as a part of Grace United Methodist Church, what the future looks like. The walking in between. You know, in the midst of that reality, it's a bit funny to do a stewardship campaign. I mean, it's necessary. It's part of how we figure out how to operate together, our life together. And yet, I know that uncertainty is rarely something that people are quick to invest in. There is transition. There is a borderland. There's a place that we're walking between what we know and what we don't. We're not yet fully into uncharted territory, but we can see that that's the direction we're headed. Jesus is walking, presumably with his disciples, in this borderland, walking the in-between. I feel that this year. Do you have some borderland that you're walking in your life right now, personally, individually, you as a family? You can see some change coming on the horizon, but you're not there yet. It's hard to be present in those moments. Because we either want to retreat back to what is comfortable and just pretend that nothing is going to change and it's going to be as it always has been, or we just want to skip the in-between, the unknown, and run immediately to the next thing. Jesus is present in the midst of the borderland and the walking in between. We ought to be as well. Jesus is approached by 10 lepers. Notice the scripture talks about they approach, but they keep their distance. That was the life of a leper. You wanted to be seen because we all need to be seen and acknowledged, and yet you had to keep your distance. The 10 of them approach Jesus, probably in a great amount of pain. Leprosy is a disease that was painful for the individual, not only physically, but also psychologically, mentally, spiritually. Because part of what came with it was the isolation, the quarantine, a phrase that we're all too familiar with now, the quarantine away from the rest of community. There was an emotional aspect to this as well. There's a reason that we say today that outcasts get treated like lepers. I remember in South Africa, I was traveling one time and I went to an island that was, at one point, not when I was there, but many years before, had been a lepers colony. And just being literally in this island, the sense of isolation was profound. It would later become a prison. That's how separated it was. And it wasn't just like centuries ago, it was a few decades ago that people were sent there because of leprosy. It's a painful disease that had a great social and physiological impact on the people who had it as well. My friend Alan is a pastor in South Africa. I actually got to sit down with him just a couple of days after I was at that former lepers colony. And he preached on this passage some years ago. And when he did, he said that one of the problems with diseases like this is that if the disease doesn't kill you, the social stigma may well. He talks about that at the advent of HIV/AIDS and how many people in the United States and around the world died not from the disease, but from the social stigma related to it, from the refusal in the United States to provide adequate health care, from the moralization of a disease. That happens in big ways, that happens in small ways. When people are differently abled or ill, they often find that one of the biggest challenges and limitations are not the physical ailments that they have, but rather the way that their world and their peers treat them. But when they are seen, when they are acknowledged and heard and validated, when their humanity is affirmed instead of squashed, when their value is lifted up instead of marginalized, then there is an experience of liberation and power. That sometimes healing looks like a change in physical ability or ailment, a healing. But sometimes it looks like an allowance to be connected in community once again, to be freed from the social stigmas that come with these sorts of things. To be seen and acknowledged, freed from the extra anxiety and stress. Again, Alan Story says, they risk not only being killed by the disease, they risk being killed because they have the disease. So it's significant when the scripture says in the very next line that Jesus saw them. That piece that Jesus saw them, that's not necessary to the text. There's no need for it in the midst of the conversation. They call out, Jesus could respond, but I believe that the author of Luke's gospel is trying to tell us something clear, that in the midst of that social stigma and that navigating the distance and the approach, Jesus sees them, acknowledges them. That they who have been pushed to the margin, they who are often looked past, Jesus looks at them, Jesus sees them, the scripture says. How often do we see the poor, the powerless, the weak, and the weary in our lives? We've been conditioned to look past people who are in times of difficulty, people whose life experience is very vastly from ours. How often do we walk right past them without seeing them? Jesus saw the lepers. And notice their cry, their unison cry. Together they sing a song more or less to Jesus. They cry out, and what do they ask for? They ask for mercy. Now, mercy may have some component of healing to it, but mercy is first about the request to be seen, to be acknowledged. They don't say simply heal us. Jesus, Master, have mercy on us. See in us our humanity, acknowledge us. In the depths of our isolation and difficulty, sometimes we want to be acknowledged and appreciated as much as we want the ailment, the disease, the distress, the loss to be fixed. Sometimes we just want somebody to see us and to appreciate the challenge that we have. And if we could only get somebody to actually really understand that, to appreciate what we've offered, the challenge that we're going through, then maybe we could find ourselves a little bit of peace. Then maybe we could begin the healing process. Jesus, Master, see us, acknowledge our humanity. In Luke's gospel, this word for mercy is used a few times. God is said to have mercy on Elizabeth, who is the wife of Zechariah, when she becomes pregnant with John, who will be known as John the Baptist, Jesus' cousin. God has mercy on her because year after year after year she had prayed. They had hoped and wanted for a child, and that reality wasn't happening. And then all of a sudden it was, when she was way past childbearing age. Not only was there a miraculous intervention that she had a child, but before that, the reason that this concept of mercy is used is because God saw her, acknowledged her cry, and then responded. God had mercy on them. Earlier in Luke's gospel, it's also said that the Good Samaritan is the one who has mercy on the man who is injured on the side of the road because he sees and acknowledges him. That's the first step before he acts. The other two that passed by, they saw him. They didn't respond, though. They walked away. These men approach Jesus and they say, "Have mercy on us." And Jesus sees them. They begin their journey. Do you notice that? On their way, they receive their healing. Jesus says, I see you. I acknowledge you. Go to the priest and show yourself. So they begin that process. And it's on the journey that their healing happens. I find this so interesting. Because when somebody sends me on a journey, I want to know exactly where I'm going. If there's going to be healing in this, I would like that to start before we begin the process. I want some assurance, at least, that it's going to happen along the way. I want some clarity about what's going on, but that's not what happens for these lepers. Instead, they begin the journey, and on the journey, they find their healing. It's on the way. I think there's a message for many of us in that sometimes that the healing, the wholeness that we want, the assurance that we want before we begin a journey, it's going to be a path that we make while we're walking. They're going and they're made clean. And the scripture continues to say that one of them, when he saw that he had been healed, turned back, praising God in a loud voice. Now, notice this is the second word that is used to refer to their healing. First, as they are on their way, the scripture says that they are cleansed. That's one Greek word. Then it says that one of them notices that he was healed. That's a different Greek word referring to the same thing that happened to the man. That's important. We're going to come back to that in a moment. But when he notice that his gratitude doesn't begin when he gets back to Jesus. Again, it's on the journey. I just think there's something powerful in that for you and I that want so much certainty. I want so much certainty about what is to come. The healing comes as the journey begins, and in his response, he doesn't wait till he gets to Jesus. He praises all the way along. Part of the power of worship is that it's a time to pause in the week to reflect back on what it is that we've experienced, on how it is that God has moved, to give thanks and to share our gratitude with God for all that's gone on in our lives. But what would it also look like to have those moments of worship, to give gratitude to God throughout our week? What if we didn't wait till we got to church, but we did it in a car on the way? What if we experienced something and we took some time out of our day to say a prayer, to sing a song, to just be grateful for what it is that we have? What if you carved out 5 minutes of your day each day where you wanted to reflect on gratitude? What if you carved out some time to reach out to people that you love and that are meaningful to you and to tell them how much you value them? What if you wrote thank you notes to folks on a regular basis, just to say, I value the impact that you've had on my life? You know, it's part of the challenge of this scripture is to find ways to express our gratitude in the midst of the in-between times, not just in formal ways, but in informal ways as well. When the man, who we now find out is a Samaritan, makes his way back to Jesus, it says that he throws himself at Jesus' feet and he thanks him. Another beautiful image in this passage. Jesus asks about the others, not really talking to the man. It seems more for the people who are around. He says, "We're not 10 cleansed?" By the way, that's the third reference to the healing. And we're back to that first word. On the way they were made clean. The man noticed his healing. And then Jesus says, "We're not 10 cleansed." Where are the other 9? Was none of them found to return and give praise to God except this foreigner? One person wrote of this passage, where are they, the other ones? Were they so caught up in their good fortune that they failed to see God's hand in their healing? That was convicting, because are we so caught up in our own good fortune that we fail to see God's hand at work in our lives? What was a unison chorus of 10 voices has now become a solo as the one man cries out to Jesus. So I've said I'm convicted when I read this story. because I might guess that 9 out of 10 times I failed to express gratitude to God and to others. Most of the time it's because I don't even notice the things that I could be grateful for. My wife is just incredible about looking people in service settings, a gas station, a restaurant, in the eye and saying thank you so much and genuinely meaning it. And usually by the time she gets through her statement of gratitude for a store clerk or whoever, I'm already out the door. Part of why I think I miss it 9 out of 10 times is because I don't even notice the people that I should be thankful for. I don't notice all the blessings around me that I could give thanks to God for. I fail to express proper gratitude because I don't take notice. Or sometimes I even feel entitled to them. So how do we get better at that? How do we build in our days times to express gratitude? How do we cultivate a spirit in which we acknowledge the thankfulness that we have for the people around us and the blessings that God has given to us? That's the task for this week. The passage ends with the words of Jesus, and I think the most important words of all that we've read today. Jesus says, "Get up and go on your way. Your faith has made you well." Now, this is the fourth reference to some sort of healing in this passage, but it's a different word. When Jesus said, "You have been made well," in Greek, the way that is normally translated is "you have received salvation." That's what Jesus is said. This is something far more profound than having physical healing. Jesus declares that this man has experienced salvation, has been made whole, has been saved. He was healed on that day, but he also experienced salvation, a richness of life. His gratitude, his response, has allowed him to experience a taste of the goodness and the glory and the grace of God. In the beauty and the blessing of life, there is a richness that we often forego because we're too slow to share our gratitude. Good and wonderful experiences are made all the more deep and powerful when we reflect on them enough and express our gratitude. We're often too busy, though, to give thanks and too distracted to offer gratefulness for all that we have. As we celebrate generosity this month, we begin with gratitude because, as I shared earlier in this message and earlier this year for the Wesleyan Christian, we respond to God's invitation towards living in a particular way, towards our calling, towards sharing our gifts, not out of a sense of obligation or duty, but out of a sense of gratitude for God's great mercy. It begins with gratitude. I want to read a couple of words from Alan Culpepper's commentary on this passage. He says this: "Gratitude may be the purest measure of one's character and spiritual condition. The absence of the ability to be grateful reveals self-centeredness or the attitude that I deserve more than I get, so I do not need to be grateful." At the heart of all this conversation around gratitude is a question about the condition of our heart. Do we recognize the blessings around us? Do we let God and others know that we recognize all the goodness that is around us? So today, for what are you grateful? And how are you making that known to others? In the process of gratitude and expressing our thankfulness, we too may experience a small taste of salvation. Let's take a few moments for reflection.